At last, high noon for Labour. After weeks of indecision, one of Jeremy Corbyn's leading critics, Angela Eagle, has announced that she is running against him for the leadership. It's going to be an immensely bruising, brutal and damaging conflict. Are we looking at the last days of the Labour Party? Jeremy Corbyn, now fighting to save his leadership, joins me this morning. And the man preparing a British version of impeachment against Tony Blair, David Davis, is here to explain how and why. UKIP is planning a huge assault on Labour seats across England. Aaron Banks, its financial backer and possible future leader, is here to discuss life after Nigel. And here to review the papers, the former Labour advisor Ayesha Hazarika, Tim Loughton, campaign manager for Andrea Leadsom, and CNN's chief international correspondent Christiane Amanpour. And then, from Peaky Blinders to the deep blue sea, Helen McCrory will be telling me about hope, heartache, and why she is not moving to Hollywood. Plus, it's been 20 years since the band Miracle Legion achieved cult status. They're back, and we've got them. Just a little more, she'd have been a homer. So all of that coming up after the news, but first, Victoria Fritz.
Good morning. The leader of the Unite trade union, Len McCluskey, has warned of lasting divisions within the Labour Party if Jeremy Corbyn is kept off the ballot paper in the forthcoming leadership election. The former Shadow Business Secretary, Angela Eagle, is due to formally trigger a leadership contest tomorrow. It's thought Labour's national executive will meet on Tuesday to decide whether Mr Corbyn can stand without the backing of at least 50 MPs and MEPs. John Prescott, the Deputy Prime Minister at the time Britain went to war with Iraq in 2003, has declared the invasion illegal. Writing in the Sunday Mirror, Lord Prescott said the Attorney General at the time had provided no documentation to back up his verbal assertion that the invasion was lawful. He also apologised for his role in the war. Sir Cliff Richard is due to sue the BBC and South Yorkshire Police for £1 million over live TV coverage of a police raid at his home. Officers were filmed searching the singer's apartment in Berkshire in 2014 as part of an investigation into historic sex offences. He was never arrested or charged, but Sir Cliff says the gross invasion of his privacy damaged his reputation and made him ill. The UK anti-doping agency has launched an investigation into claims that 3 British athletes paid for performance-enhancing drugs while training in Kenya. A self-styled medic and 2 Kenyan doctors were secretly filmed by the Sunday Times, making claims they'd been paid by British athletes to administer a banned blood-boosting drug. In a statement, UK Athletics said it was seeking clarification on the allegations. And Andy Murray will be seeking his second Wimbledon title when he takes on Milos Raonic this afternoon. It's the British number one's 11th Grand Slam final, but the first in which he's not facing either Novak Djokovic or Roger Federer. And that's all from me for now. Back to you, Andrew.
Many thanks, Victoria. Now to the papers, a lot to get through. Sunday Mirror has a genuine scoop here. John Prescott has said that Tony Blair forced us into an illegal war. He's used the illegal word. I think the phone lines to Hull will be thrumming this morning. The Sun has a story about sex abuse or something or other. I'm so sorry, Sun, not today. The Sunday Telegraph, Tory women turn against Leadsom as motherhood row deepens. And it's not a great morning for Andrea Leadsom's campaign. There's the front page of the Sunday Express. Mum's fury at Leadsom. And the Sunday Times, Leadsom's enemies stick the knife in. Serena Williams there as well after her great victory. Mail on Sunday, Sir Cliff Richard sues the BBC, as you heard on the news there, for £1 million. And then finally, The Observer ties it all together with their headline. It's a general political meltdown, folks, they say. Labour and Conservatives in turmoil as battles for leadership turn ugly. And there's Jeremy Corbyn saying that he's not going and looking very calm there. Now, lots to talk about. I think we're going to start with you, Ayesha.
Yes, I'm going to start with the Conservative row over Andrea Leadsom and her comments about motherhood. Now, many of us feminists are very pleased that finally there's going to be, 2 women vying for the top spot, but it is very depressing that this has become a row about whether or not you are fit to govern, depending on whether or not you've had children. And there's a huge backlash against Andrea Leadsom from a lot of senior Conservative women, Anna Soubry, Priti Patel, Ruth Davidson, who doesn't have children herself. She says, I have nieces and nephews, and I, like everyone else, have a very real stake in the country.
Do you think it's fair everyone's ganging up on Leadsom over this?
Well, look, I think women pay a penalty either way. I think if women have got children in politics, they suffer a hard time. They often get asked the question, can you cope? Can you dedicate enough time? If you don't have children, you almost pay a penalty. Why don't you have children? Why haven't you sort of fit that norm? I think one of the mistakes that Andrea Leadsom did make, though, was to sort of contest what was said, because Rachel Sylvester, the journalist who did the interview, is a very respected and credible journalist. And actually, when they released the transcript, it was even worse, actually, when we heard the full conversation.
And you can imagine, as a war correspondent, journalist and a mother, we face all the very same issues that many women all over Britain do, whether you're a mother or not a mother. If you've tried and you can't have kids, this is not an in Europe or out of Europe issue. This is an issue that grassroots people understand, mothers everywhere. And I think it shows a lack of judgment, to be frank. Whether you talk the feminist card here, it shows a lack of judgment to even say that in public. Because it's great to have so many women vying for the top job.
Tim, I suppose that the really poisonous aspect of this is she appeared to be suggesting that because Theresa May didn't have children, she somehow didn't have as much stake in Britain's future as Andrea did.
Absolutely not the case, and she made it absolutely clear in that interview all the way through that in no way was her passion for her family and her children to be taken in any way derogatory towards Theresa.
Yet she raised it.
Why did she do it, Tim?
Because that's what fires her up.
She did say, Tim, in the transcript that, that she didn't have a stake, she had a better stake of understanding the future because she had children.
People are fired up and inspired by different things. In Andrea's case, and I've known her, I'm godfather to her eldest son, her children are the thing that really fires her up. Andy Murray today has said the most important thing for him now is his family. So is he criticising other tennis players who don't have children? Would we be having this argument if these were two men as the candidates?
We definitely would be having this argument.
Can I ask a slightly wider question? Because in all the analysis of the Leadsom versus May battle, it's being suggested that this is a kind of culture war as well. This is, as it were, the traditional Conservative right, Ian Duncan Smith and so forth, a bit more sceptical about gay marriage, a bit less liberal about some of the things that came in under the modernisers in the Cameron era, getting back perhaps your final chance to take back the Conservative Party.
There's nothing traditional about Andrea in this respect. This is not about trying to take back control of the Conservative Party. This is a fresh candidate in Andrea Leadsom, who has much more experience outside of politics than all the other candidates put together.
And you picked a story in the Sunday Times which analyses the two campaigns.
Well, I think, look, both candidates are immensely strong. We had 5 very strong leadership candidates for the Tory party leadership. Any of them a credible Prime Minister. The Labour Party is desperate to try and find one and struggling. They bring different aspects. Each of them would make a fantastic Prime Minister. I had absolutely no problem with Theresa as Prime Minister serving her government or from the backbenches or whatever. But Andrea, I'm afraid the establishment seem to be getting Andrea. It's all about let's gang up on Andrea.
Can I just say that's a little bit unfair, because we went through this through the Brexit argument as well. If the Remain camp brought out facts, the Brexiteers criticised the messenger, and the same thing is happening here in the May Leadsom race. She said what she said. She said what she said, and she said what she said. That is her judgment.
And what she said is she's passionate about her kids.
Correct.
Let's move on from the children.
When has it been a crime to be proud about your children?
It's never a crime. But the thing is, it's also about pro and who is really the best position to take this position. And I think political press need to really take the facts and see, where the weight lies. But I want to ask you, policies,
well,
exactly.
Can I just raise one policy for Andrea?
Just a quick question here. I want to ask you, because this is a genuine question here. You have Britain First, a far-right extremist group who is potentially getting, behind Andrea Leadsom. Is that a worry for you? Because this ultra-nationalist group is very dangerous. dangerous. I mean, we've had a political assassination in this country. Of course, they denied they had anything to do with it.
You can't choose the people, I suppose, who...
But are you going to really get up and say, no, we will not be associated with this kind of thing?
Absolutely.
Look what's happening in the United States.
They are vile, toxic, loathsome people. We want absolutely nothing to do with them. If anybody needs to be deported, it's people with those sorts of dangerous, poisonous views. They are trying to make out a campaign for Angela simply because she's a Brexit candidate.
What is the positive message from Andrea Leadsam's campaign? What is it about her that makes you think that she'd be a great Prime Minister?
OK, she is a fresh face who made a virtue out of absolutely passionately believing that Britain's best future was outside of the EU, and she wants to make that work, and she wants to be in the position to make sure that Britain achieves that.
All right, let's turn to the other big political story of the day, which I started the programme with, the struggle for the Labour leadership. Angela Eagle has come out now saying that she is going to stand. She's going to formally announce over the course of the weekend or tomorrow. And that is really going to plunge your party, Aisha, because it was your party, into complete turmoil for a bit, isn't it?
It's very serious for the Labour Party. It's actually very serious for British politics. You know, we're in a very, very difficult climate. We have a government which is having a leadership crisis, and we have an opposition which is not functional at the moment. So there was an impasse that had been reached. Those talks clearly broke down yesterday. I think what Angela had wanted to do was give those talks a chance. Clearly they reached a failure. So she's indicated strongly that she will...
Jeremy Corbyn's people would say that Tom Watson brought the House down in order to allow Angela Eagle to make that the whole thing was part of the plot.
I don't take that view. I genuinely think that Tom Watson did everything he could to get a deal because, look, the future of the Labour Party is very precarious now. We have a parliamentary party which is ground to a halt. We have a leader who cannot command the respect of Parliament. Yes, the members are important, the voter is important, but your MPs in Parliament are important. So I think it is right that Angela is going to launch a campaign because we have to try and find some way forward for the Labour Party.
Now, Aisha, I said right at the top of the programme that this was going to be a brutal and damaging campaign or something like that. And some people may think, why am I saying that? But you've got some tweets, I think, there which give a little bit of a sense of some of what's being said already before it's got going properly.
I mean, the climate in the Labour Party has become very hostile, particularly against women. There's a lot of misogyny, there's a lot of homophobia. Angela Eagle particularly is now at the receiving end, having had the temerity to challenge Jeremy. She really is receiving quite disgusting abuse. There is a Twitter feed called Gentler Politics. I can't actually read out most of the tweets because they're so vile. But let me give you a flavour of how a lot of women, particularly in the Labour Party, who have expressed a view against Jeremy Corbyn. One MP said to me, look, we used to get together on caucus and talk about the equal pay gap, childcare. We are now dealing with death threats, rape threats, threats to our family. And some of this, not all of it, but some of it is coming from Jeremy Corbyn supporters.
No, I know you're also a stand-up comic, and your new show, Tales from the Pink Bus, is about women in politics. Is it going to deal with some of these darker sides of being a woman in politics?
Yes, it does. I mean, it's a very honest show about my time in the Labour Party and how difficult it is for women in power. But hopefully, we will see that change soon.
Maybe one time, instead of the music at the end of the show, will get you there to do a bit of a number.
Great plug for her show, though.
You've got a story from The Observer, I think, about voter turnout. Interesting story, because we always wonder, how interested are people in what's going on, really?
Well, if there's one really encouraging thing about the referendum, one, the turnout was 72%, the highest turnout in a national election since 1992. But a survey, quite comprehensive survey from the LSE, has shown that amongst young people, 18 to 24-year-olds, who are the most reluctant voters, the turnout was 64%. Now,
That's the last really interesting, because people were trying to get these young voters on board because they thought they were Remainers, and Brexit nonetheless won.
And we had that last-minute extension because supposedly young people didn't get their act together to register. The last general election, the turnout was something like 43%, and it actually, amongst young voters, actually went down. So most young voters don't bother to vote, including first-time voters. The referendum actually got to them, engaged them, and got them to go out and vote. So there is some hope that actually our democracy is going in the right direction, which is fantastic.
OK, now there's two other stories we must do. One is Chilcot and one is Dallas. Christiane, start with Chilcot.
Well, obviously, we've all been through Chilcot and we've seen the verdict, and it was very damning. It was not a whitewash. It was pretty damning against Tony Blair. He didn't get away with it, so to speak, in the court of public opinion. I would say, having covered the war, I remember that the actual war itself was won pretty quickly with relatively fewer casualties than the post-war. I think the big lesson going forward, if we want to go forward, is the absolutely atrocious negligence, by mostly the Americans of the lack of post-planning. And I was there, I saw it. I remember reporting first the looting, and we were told by Donald Rumsfeld, that's not looting, that's the same, you know, porcelain vase coming out over and over.
It's the State Department and the Foreign Office.
Well, it's the Pentagon, actually. To be very frank, it was the Pentagon in the United States under Donald Rumsfeld who poo-pooed any idea of professional post-war planning and failed to recognize and denied the insurgency. And that was really terrible. Then you had the surge.
We're going to talk to David
Then you
Davis
had the
in a moment
surge, and that stopped
about
Al-Qaeda.
what happens next. Very interesting. The other story we absolutely must do is Dallas.
Well,
the
our
Dallas
friend,
shootings.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say that Marie Colvin, who was killed...
I know, there's a legal case now.
There's a legal case. Well, Dallas is absolutely appalling. Obviously, what happened in Dallas and the killing of the police officers, which came because of, apparently, according to the crazy guy, the killings of the black people in Minnesota and Baton Rouge. And that is becoming a very, very tough...
Race in America is getting lethal and extremely dangerous.
Yeah, and so are the politics going to the extreme, and you don't want to see that coming here to Britain.
So this was a fairly bleak news review. Has anyone got the front page of the Observer there?
Yes,
because there is
they
nailed
yes,
it.
because it's here we go. Weather terrible, sterling tumbling, politics dismal, Euro flops, not Wales, Brexit coming, recession looming. Andy, please cheer us up.
I'll have to say, as a Scot...
Wimbledon has never mattered more.
Yes, and as a Scot, it's never mattered more as well.
He's British, and we won the wheelchair doubles at Wimbledon yesterday.
Wheelchair, let's not forget that. Listen, thanks all of you. That was really interesting. Now then, Tony Blair, as we've just heard, faced the judgment of the Chilcot inquiry on the Iraq War last week, and the findings, as Christiane said, were pretty damning on the way intelligence was presented, how decisions were made, and the lack of military preparation. Sir John Chilcot also said that the circumstances in which it was decided there was a legal basis for invasion were, quotes, far from satisfactory. So what, if anything, should MPs do about it all? I'm joined by David Davis, the Conservative MP now. David Davis, MPs can't, as it were, prosecute Tony Blair for an illegal war or anything like that. We don't have impeachment as the Americans do in this country. So what can you do?
No, we've been trying to get that through the House authorities for a while, and it's impossible. I mean, it's out of date, our impeachment procedure. So what we're going to do instead is I'm going to put down a contempt motion, a motion which says that Tony Blair has held the House in contempt. Now, it's a bit like contempt of court. It's the same sort of thing.
By lying to the House? Because Chilcot says he doesn't say he lied.
By deceiving. Well, you see, this is interesting. Blair claims, Chilcot did not say I was a liar. Chilcot wasn't asked to rule on that. Chilcot was asked to rule on the causes of the war and the consequences of the war, not on whether Tony Blair lied or not. Now, if you look at just at the debate alone, on 5 different grounds, the House was misled. 3 in terms of the weapons of mass destruction, 1 in terms of the way the UN votes were going, and 1 in terms of the threat, the risk. Now, the point is, he might have done one of those accidentally, but 5 different deceptions on the House.
So this is a contempt motion in the House of Commons. First of all, do you have the numbers to get this through, do you think?
We don't know. I mean, the group that started it were about 20 MPs from all parties. But everybody I talked to thinks that there has been, as it were, a trial, but there's no verdict. And the House has to deliver a verdict. I mean, I talked to members of the families, lawyers, soldiers. They all want a verdict. And that's what this is about, is delivering a verdict on Tony Blair's taking us into that war.
So the next question is, when does this happen?
Well, I'm going to put down a contempt motion on Thursday of this week. And if the Speaker accepts it, and I think the odds are good because it's it's a public interest thing.
The word is that it's likely.
It's likely, I think, to be the next week, the very next week, so before the end of term.
So if this happens next week and the Commons votes for the contempt motion, what happens next to Tony Blair?
Well, that's an interesting area of debate. I mean, the government might choose to strip him of his Privy Councillorship, for example. I mean, Privy
the government could do that, and that would be a big deal.
Well, it's been done before. I mean, Jack Profumo lost his Privy Councillorship for lying to the House. And that was just about sex scandal, not about something that led to 150,000 innocent Iraqis being killed, maybe millions dying as a consequence. Destruction of the Middle East.
Would Tony Blair have to come to the bar of the House of Commons to answer?
That's another possibility. That's another possibility. The irony of this is that the House can't drag him there. If they summon him and he doesn't turn up, what happens?
Nothing can be done.
Nothing happens there. So it's a question of persuading the authorities to take the next step. And I think a government would have to take this seriously. They did it with Profumo, and this is much more serious than that. Much more serious than that.
Now, you clashed with Theresa May a bit in the old days over civil liberties and other things. You're now
probably still will in the future.
You're now backing her campaign. We've talked a lot about Andrea Leadsom. She is a fresh face and so forth. Do you think that she is fit to be a British Prime Minister?
Well, look, she's intelligent and charming and so on, but I think what the events of the last week have demonstrated is she's come under a bit of pressure because leadership contests, as I know to my cost, are somewhat pressurised, but they're nothing like as pressurised as being Prime Minister. And what we've seen, I don't think I've seen malice in this last incident, the so-called Mothergate thing, but inexperience. And inexperience in that, in her response to that, inexperience in her proposals to trigger Article 50 the moment she wins, if she were to win. There are lots and lots of things she's done in the first week or two which show really she's not got the experience. I mean, she's a junior minister at the moment, and she's leaping to the most difficult job in government at the most difficult time in our history.
So it's people talk about the glass cliff, not the glass ceiling, but you take a woman into a really difficult position and there's a cliff and you push her off it.
Well, frankly, it's not about whether she's a woman or not. Actually, the wonderful aspect of this is whoever wins, we're going to have another woman Prime Minister, you know. And you have to apply the same standards to both Theresa and to Andrea.
And you think she's just a bit lacking in experience?
And I think it's not intelligence. I don't think it's goodwill. I think it's just experience, which is the weakness. And that will change with time, of course. But at the moment, she's too inexperienced for a really important job at the most important time in our history.
David Davis, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, as we heard, Andy Murray carries the hopes of the nation again in his third Wimbledon final this afternoon. What will the weather serve up for him? Over to Sarah Keith-Lucas, who's there on centre court, ready for all the action. Sarah.
Well, Andrew, it has been a bit of a cloudy start to the day here at Wimbledon. We've had a few spots of drizzle. The roof is closed at the moment on centre court, and we could see a bit more rain over the next few hours. But I think we can be fairly optimistic that the weather should brighten up through the afternoon, and we're hopeful that the roof should stay open for the Murray game later on in the day. Elsewhere across the country, it's a humid and a breezy feel to the weather today, with some outbreaks of rain, but also a little bit of sunshine in there too. By around about 11 o'clock this morning, there will be outbreaks of rain across the western half of Wales, brighter skies for the southwest of England, but anywhere from around the Isle of Wight up towards the Wash and to the south of that line, that's where we'll continue to see the cloud and the drizzly outbreaks of rain. Further north, some brighter skies into parts of the northeast of England this morning, but showers for northwest England and across Scotland and Northern Ireland too. We're expecting to see some outbreaks of rain, some of those outbreaks of rain pretty heavy at times. Quite a blustery feel to the weather through the day too. Now, the weather will be moving its way west to east across the country, so things will clear up towards the southeast. Some uncertainty on how quickly that rain gets out of the way, but it'll be replaced by sunshine, scattered showers mainly to the north of London, across Wales, northern England, a showery theme, and the rain will continue on and off at times for Scotland and for Northern Ireland. Temperatures today between around 17 to 22 degrees, and things look fresher with sunshine and showers for the next few days, but we're hopeful of a dry men's final here at Wimbledon.
That's good news. We're always hopeful. It has been, however, a bloody summer. Now then, UKIP's impact on British politics in recent years is undeniable. One of the key figures in UKIP is its main donor, Aaron Banks, usually described as a multimillionaire insurance tycoon. He spent millions funding the unofficial campaign to leave the EU, but his ambitions do not end, as we'll hear with Brexit. He's here now. Welcome, Aaron Banks.
Thank you,
Now,
Andrew.
we're going to talk about the future of UKIP and as a party, but one of your targets, as it were, are all of those Labour seats in the northeast of England and in the Midlands, which voted heavily for Brexit.
Well, I think if you look at the general election, there were probably up to 30 seats the Conservatives won as a result of UKIP actually drawing votes away from Labour. And I think we've seen the follow-through in Brexit, really, where the Leave vote was very big in Labour areas.
You're putting money and organisation into those seats. How many do you think you could win?
I think you could win up to 30 or 40, potentially. I think there's much greater opportunity with the Labour Party. I think they're totally disconnected with their actual voters, and we saw that as we went around the country. I mean, you look at some of the seats up to 75% or 70% voted leave.
And your campaign, Grassroots Out, very much highlighted immigration as the big issue. Would it be the same kind of campaign again, do you think?
It's actually Leave.eu, but
Leave.eu.
that's fine.
But there's Grassroots Out as well, wasn't there?
Well, they got involved, but it was...
Right, okay.
it was
I get confused.
We do as well.
Yeah. But are they? Is it going to be an immigration-based campaign, do you think, at the election?
I don't think it's necessarily immigration. I mean, I think it's the whole disconnect between this kind of metropolitan elite that sneer at working people, and I think there's a great opportunity to take some real policies back into these Labour heartlands that are for working people.
I guess if there was one moment or poster which crystallised people's worries about the Brexit side of the argument, it was that breaking point poster with the migrants leading up Nigel Farage. Do you regret that in any way?
I wasn't really involved in that. That was a UKIP matter.
Did you think it was a mistake?
I didn't think it was a mistake. I think that in terms of the referendum, it was very much the economy versus immigration, and I think it put immigration right at the forefront of people's thoughts. I thought it was not a mistake at all.
Now, I noticed you grimacing when I said a potential future leader at the beginning of the programme. Are you not? I thought you were thinking about putting your hat in the ring for that.
That's just the way I smile, Andrew.
So
I don't know. I haven't really decided. I think it probably will be someone like Stephen Wolfe or someone else, but I haven't discounted it completely.
Now, you have very strongly backed Andrea Leadsom. She said, I don't want Aaron Banks's money, I don't want UKIP support and so forth, but you see her as essential. Why? Do you think the establishment will still try to stop Brexit happening?
Let's be clear, I've had absolutely no contact with Andrea Leadsom and her team, but what I do fear is Theresa May, which I think would be Brexit, would be the death of Brexit by 1,000 cuts. I mean, it's really...
You think she would betray the referendum, in effect?
Yes, and I think this kind of Project Fear has now moved into Project Smear. The whole of the media are behind May, and I think there's a good reason for that. I think that they delay Article 50, and I think the reason is very clear.
So to be absolutely clear, you think that she might not, for instance, trigger Article 50 until it's too late, until maybe another party has taken power or things have moved on so long, or that she will try to get single market and keep free movement of people?
I think she will probably try to do just that and go for the Norway option, because what happened in Norway was the people against being part of the European Union, but the political elite have actually pushed as much as they can into that.
If Andrea Leadsom wins, then a lot of UKIP people, you have said, and many people think, will simply move into the Tory party.
Yeah.
If, and therefore UKIP's future has got a question mark over it. If Theresa May wins, you have said you're going to pour £10 million into reviving the fight against Theresa May's version of Toryism.
Well, I think that if Theresa May wins, UKIP will be back with a vengeance. I think if Andrea Leadsom wins, it will be a slightly different scenario.
Are we talking about a new party here?
I think potentially could be talking about a new party, and I think there are very good sound reasons for that.
What are they? Sorry.
Well, if you look at our Leave.eu campaign, we had nearly 1 million online followers. The social media reached out to 15 million people a week, and we had tremendous reach. Our database has got something like 40,000 Conservative Party members on it, and albeit that the Conservative Party is a dying membership, it's only got 100,000 members. You can contrast that to Labour with 500,000. I think there's a huge opportunity for a different type of party.
So a new name, a more online party,
Very much
more
so.
money, fresh faces, and taking on both Labour and the Tories.
Yes, and perhaps more direct democracy. The elite have hated the referendum because it took the power away from them, and actually I think this has been a wonderful thing. So actually the idea of more referendum and going down the Swiss kind of model I think would be fantastic.
Aaron Banks, thanks very much for
Thank
talking
you,
to us
Andrew.
today. Now then, 2 years ago, Helen McCrory's performance as Medea in the National Theatre won her a whole new legion of fans. She is back at the National this summer, having exchanged Greek tragedy for English. A revival of Terence Rattigan's masterpiece, The Deep Blue Sea, is a study in heartbreak, based on the playwright's own tragic love life. I caught up with Helen McCrory recently to talk about the play, but I started by asking about the hugely successful TV role as the Peaky Blinders' terrifying female gang boss, Aunt Polly.
I want my son out of prison now.
Thomas, I spoke to Johnny Doggs.
This meeting should just be family.
Oh, Canal.
It's family only. She's not blood,
Let us
Tommy.
speak.
Or is this a business? Have you forgotten your family?
Enough, Polly. It's mine.
I spoke to Johnny Doggs. The Lees are king.
The bloody Lees!
They can give us men.
We don't need more men. It's men that have done the damage. It is men fighting like cockerels that have put us here in the first place.
When the men came back from the First World War, she'd been running the business while they'd been away. And when Tommy comes back, the complexity that she must go through trying to hand over her business, but also to men that have been so brutalised by the First World War. As far as she's concerned, they're doing it really badly. I mean, they're making constant mistakes. They're sort of going into other people's turfs. And her ability to, on one hand, balance the business, on the other hand, balance the family, and be able to want to expand down to London and abroad, and as we're about to see in the new Peaky Blinders, go further and further afield, means that you see why she's in charge.
One of the great debates that has gone on forever and a day is why can't the British produce great big multi-series, multi-year epics on television like the Americans do, whether it's Game of Thrones or Homeland or many others. And perhaps Peaky Blinders is the first to break through in this way.
We have a fantastic tradition in this country of gritty realism, and the Kezes and the Greengrasses and the Loaches, and so we should be very proud of them. They're brilliant, brilliant filmmakers and television makers. But however, Steve Knight has done something that we don't normally like doing, which is blowing our own trumpet and glamorising our own past. And he does it, with a bunch of crims from Birmingham. And now you go to New York, and there are hip parts of New York that you won't see a barber without seeing a bunch of Peaky Blinders walking out of it. So
fantastic, with the flat gaps and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Welcome to the family.
Oh, I see. Tommy's orders. No upsets tonight?
The hair, everything. Beautiful.
The Deep Blue Sea, the Rattigan play. It's a late play by Terence Rattigan, and quite unlike his image. It's darker and I guess richer in some respects.
I think that the suicide of Kenneth Marr, his lover, that happened 3 years before this play was first produced in 1952, was the kernel of that. His lover was discovered in a West London flat who'd gassed himself. Rattigan got the news by telegram, and his first response was, "Burn the telegram, I'm going upstairs to write a play." And it's believed that he wrote the third act of The Deep Blue Sea that night.
He does something very, very odd by today's standards. He takes a gay story and makes it straight, because of course in the 1950s you couldn't put on a play about homosexual love, particularly if you were Sir Terence Rattigan in London, and get away with it.
Whether it was written for a man or a woman, the same attributes of the story apply, which is shame about your sexuality, the shame of that, and then the shame of running away with a man that's drunk and that doesn't love her back.
It is a wonderful play to watch. It ends on a kind of hopeful moment. You do a bit of cooking at the end, which is not what we expect.
Well,
so just explain about that.
Because actually what Rattigan asks is that right at the end of the play we have gas obviously all the way through, because she starts with a failed attempt at trying to commit suicide with gas poisoning.
Is she going to gas herself again, is what we're asking ourselves.
Exactly.
Response, yeah.
And right at the end what Rattigan asks is that you come in and she lights the gas fire and she asks her lover, "Have you eaten?" And he says, "No, I'm going to eat later." So I asked for a stove to be put into one of the rehearsals and to try and cook something. So it's the same sort of idea. Miller says to her, "Well, you just have to get up tomorrow and live." And
it's a symbol of going on, cracking on.
You might be crying, but eat your egg sandwich and get on with it.
You live in Beverly Hills and in London. Is the British television world, and indeed the British theatre world, big enough to keep somebody like you here permanently?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think that not only is it keeping people like me here permanently, it's actually moving a lot of Beverly Hills over here. I worked with Scorsese here, Spielberg's just come over here. Scorsese wants to come back because the excellence of the crews over here is unsurpassed, I think, in the world.
So actually working is more flexible in Britain now than it is in America, which is amazing, because in the old days it was completely the other way around. I mean, the Kinks got kicked out of America because the union didn't like them and so forth.
Yeah, far more flexible working over here, and the Americans are coming over here. I mean, I was supposed to be filming something last year called Penny Dreadful that was supposed to be filming in London. We couldn't get any film space. The next project I'm supposed to be doing, again, we're looking for studio space because everybody's over here.
The boom industry. Helen McCrory, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, thank you.
Helen McCrory there, and on the 1st of December the Deep Blue Sea will be broadcast by National Theatre Live to over 650 cinemas across the UK. Now in a moment I'm going to be talking to Jeremy Corbyn, but first a brief look at what's coming up on BBC One after this programme.
Andrew, hello. On Sunday Morning Live, what lessons can we in Britain learn from Dallas about the relationship between police and the black community? Lord Grade, Michael Grade, is going to tell us why he's cracking down on high-pressure fundraising techniques by charities. And we ask, is it fair for transgender women born as men to compete against women in the Olympics? We'll have all of that at 10.
Now, about that National Theatre thing, I said December, I meant September, so apologies for that. 2 weeks ago, the former Shadow Foreign Secretary Hilary Benn was sitting here, having been fired in the middle of the night by Jeremy Corbyn. That provoked a deluge of resignations from the Shadow Cabinet and a crisis for the Labour leader unprecedented in British politics. Since then, Mr Corbyn hasn't done a major interview, but this weekend, Angela Eagle has announced her formal challenge to him and a brutal knock-down fight for the soul and perhaps the future of the Labour Party starts here. Jeremy Corbyn, welcome. Now, all this started with reaction to the Brexit vote. So a very, very straightforward question, if I may, to start with. Which way did you vote in that referendum yourself?
Remain. I'm surprised you even asked the question.
Well, I asked it because quite a lot of people around you suggested that you had never been a supporter.
Nobody ever suggested I was going to do anything other than vote Remain, and I think you're very well aware of that.
Did you do everything you possibly could have done, do you think, to win that for the Remain side?
I worked flat out. I travelled the whole country. I addressed union conferences, street meetings, public meetings, universities, colleges, lots of places, urging people to vote Remain because of the general direction this country would go if we voted to leave. I'm not uncritical of the European Union, as everybody knows, and indeed the most of the population are not uncritical of the European Union. And I've been reaching out. Yesterday, I came back from Paris, where I'd been, Friday rather, where I'd been meeting the Party of European Socialists to work together with socialist parties, in some cases governments across Europe, on how we deal with this and what access we have to the single market in the future and protect the social conditions that we have got through the social chapter in the treaty.
Angela Eagle has now announced that she is going to stand against you. Have you any message for her this weekend?
Well, I'm disappointed, but obviously she's free to do that if she wishes to. We have worked together in the past 6 months, or 9 months actually, in the Shadow Cabinet, and this is an opportunity when we could be putting enormous pressure on this Tory government, on inequality and injustice, on poverty, and all the issues this Tory government is doing.
Would you like her at the 11th hour to think again in that case?
Well, she resigned from the Shadow Cabinet. We had a conversation after she had announced her resignation from the Shadow Cabinet, and I would ask her to think for a moment. This is the opportunity of the party to unite against what the Tories are doing, to put forward an agenda which is different to the austerity agenda being put forward by the Tories, and actually gain a lot of ground. We now have a very large membership. Over 500,000 people are members of our party. Yeah. They've joined for a reason, and they want to see a party that is active all the time, opposing what this government's doing.
If she does stand, however, are you confident you can get the 51 nominations you need to be on the ballot for the next leadership?
I'm expecting to be on the ballot paper because the rules of the party indicate that the existing leader, if challenged, should be on the ballot paper anyway.
But the legal advice that's been taken by the party says that you do need those nominations, as Neil Kinnock had to get them when he was challenged.
That was, Neil should remind himself, that was in 1988, when the election of leader was done by an electoral college system. That has long since been abolished. We now have a one-member, one-vote system. The rules, in my view, are absolutely clear, and indeed, I'm not sure what this legal advice is referring to. I have not been shown any legal advice to that effect.
Have you taken legal advice of your own?
I've taken much soundings from lawyers. There's a lot of lawyers about, you know.
There are a lot of lawyers. And what do the lawyers tell you? That you will stand, you'll be on the ballot,
yes,
come what may?
Yes, indeed so.
Some people say, why should you be treated differently? I mean, Neil Kinnock had to get those numbers of people. In the past, Labour leaders have had to show that they have the support of a sizable number, actually just a fifth of the MPs and the MEPs. Why should you be different?
That was in 1988. The electoral college system has since been abolished. We now have a one-member, one-vote system, and members of Parliament have a role in that, of course they do, but at the end of the day, the final say is by the members, affiliates and supporters of the party.
But if you had to, do you think you could get those 51 nominations?
You'd be surprised how much support there is out there of people that feel that I was elected a year ago with a very large majority and a very large mandate, and since then we've defeated the government on more than 20 occasions in Parliament. We've won elections. I think we're a party that's going places and doing very well, actually.
This is something that's going to end up with the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party, the NEC, this week. If the NEC decides that you should not be on the ballot paper without getting those nominations, will you take that to court?
I will challenge that if that is the view they take, but I would also
in court.
Wait a minute, can I finish? I would just ask anyone in the party to think for a moment, is it really right that the members of the party should be denied a decision, a discussion, a choice in this? 500,000 people are members of the party because they want the party to succeed. Surely they're the people that knock on doors. They're the people that deliver leaflets. They're the people that raise the money.
But as Neil Kinnock has said, in the end, the Labour Party is a parliamentary party. Its founding constitution is to create and sustain a party in Parliament. And if you have not got the support of 80% of your own MPs, it's very hard to see how you can be an effective leader in opposition or perhaps one day in government.
Well, Neil says that, and I heard him say that, and indeed I've heard him say it on a number of occasions. The reality is the party is a coalition of affiliated unions, social societies, individual members, registered supporters and members of Parliament. They have to come together. I have reached out in a way that no other leader ever has in the breadth of the political views of people I brought round the shadow cabinet table. I'm not the one who's been trying to box myself into a corner. I've reached out in the broadest way I could.
Let's go back to how this all started, which was that very dramatic night when Hilary Benn was fired by you in the middle of the night. What's happened and why did you fire him?
Well, Hilary confirmed to me in a phone call that he had indeed been collecting signatures for some days of wanting to have a mass resignation from the shadow cabinet because he didn't agree with my leadership. I didn't think that was a particularly collegiate thing to do, particularly as we were actually involved in the EU referendum campaign at that time. I was the one who was travelling the country getting support for a Remain vote, and he confirmed he'd been doing that, and we then discussed it, and he generously, as I generously said to him, said, well, look, this really can't go on, and so we parted company.
Well, you're two courteous people, and you've no doubt
very courteous.
Parted
we both come from very courteous families.
You parted company courteously, but after that, 63 members of your team resigned, leaving you with a very kind of threadbare shadow cabinet, if I may say so. There are lots of important jobs you can't even fill, and people doing more than one job. This is not really an effective opposition in the traditional way, is it?
I'm saying to Labour MPs, you have a responsibility to represent the party in Parliament. We're only any of us in Parliament because of the work of Labour Party members and supporters and, of course, Labour voters. And I urge them to recognise that. But also, I'm keen to reach out. We're going to come together discussing how we deal with the possible UK negotiations over the next few months over the European Union. There's an awful lot of policy areas where there's a great deal of agreement, but I think the crucial one is the achievement of John McDonnell in turning economic policy around so that pretty well everybody seems to be now signed up to the idea you invest rather than cut in order to grow our economy.
But you haven't got a proper shadow Europe minister at the moment? You've got one, the same person is doing the shadow Welsh job and the Northern Irish job and the Scottish job, and he's English. I mean, this is going to be very, very hard for the Labour Party to do the serious line-by-line criticism and opposition and holding the government to account that it ought to be doing.
That's why I say to Labour MPs, get round the table, get together so that we can do the line-by-line criticism of what this government is doing. And I have to say this, that there are very many talented people in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and I'm very disappointed that some of them have declined to take on positions that have been offered. I asked them to think again about this, because our duty is to stand up for the very poorest and most vulnerable people in the society and convince the majority that a better society is one that's inclusive to all.
The hard truth is that they have lost faith in you personally, and it's not just the Blairites, it's not just the right, it's people like Lisa Nandy, Ed Miliband, who was a great, great supporter all the way through, eventually said, it's not working, it's over. And well, these are people who are supposed to be on your side.
They have said that MPs control everything in the end of the day and decide what we do or not. I just asked them to think for a moment about the very large number of members of this party and people who've joined our party in order to try and create a better society in Britain. Don't they have a right to have a say in all of this? Don't they have a voice that should be heard in all of this? And I reach out, and I'm quite prepared to work with people. I was given a huge responsibility and a mandate a year ago, and I'm carrying it out.
But those MPs have the votes of 9 million British people behind them as well. I mean, here is Louise Hay, who voted for you in the leadership campaign. She said, I completely respect the mandate Jeremy has from the membership, as you've been talking about, but in order to lead Labour in Westminster, he has to have a parliamentary mandate too, and you don't. or Lisa Nandy. The lack of confidence in the leadership goes beyond the small group of MPs who have consistently opposed Jeremy since his election. It has become clear that he is unable to form a broad, inclusive shadow cabinet that draws on the best of our movement's traditions.
Then why doesn't Lisa come back into the shadow cabinet? Why did she feel it necessary?
She doesn't have faith in you.
A week ago, she was happily in the shadow cabinet. 2 hours later, she decided she wasn't. I've noticed the enormous pressure that's been put, and MPs have told me about this, by a group saying, you've got to get out of that, you've got to leave Corbyn alone, you've got to get away from him. Sorry, we have a Labour Party. Labour MPs have, I think, a responsibility to represent our party. And I urge them to think again about what they're doing at the present time. Surely, the Tory party is in disarray. Unemployment is rising, inflation is rising, the pound is falling, jobs are closing.
This is not the time for the Labour Party to be in disarray.
Absolutely. This is the time when we should be out there doing that campaigning on an economic strategy, very ably put forward by John McDonnell, which does present a real opportunity and a real alternative for the people of this country.
But people like Lisa Nandy are grown-ups and now quite experienced politicians. They have taken their decision for their own reasons. And it remains the problem that you do not have a majority of Labour MPs, nothing like it in the Commons behind you. So one of two things can happen. Either you could decide suddenly to stand aside and end that particular problem that way, or eventually you have to get rid of those MPs who oppose you. You have to have mandatory reselections and get them all out. Get 80% of Labour MPs out.
It's a democratic party, not a dictatorship. I was elected by a very large majority of members and supporters. I did not have a majority of MPs supporting me at the very beginning. I haven't enjoyed that position during the past 9 months of leadership. I have reached out to all sections of the parliamentary party, and I would respectfully suggest that a little bit of movement to help us develop policies and campaign against this government ought to be our priority at the moment.
So what's the movement coming from you? I mean, there have been talks and negotiations and so forth. What have you been offering the rebels?
Bring people together and decide how we deal with the very complex matter of the results of the referendum vote, the effects on industry and investment and trade in this country, and the effects on environmental, human rights and social policies in Britain. Huge effects.
But when they say this is really about Jeremy Corbyn, we don't have faith in Jeremy Corbyn and the way he is running the Labour Party and his office and its competence, that kind of answer isn't going to satisfy them, is it?
Come and talk about it. I've reached out to Labour MPs in a way that very few other leaders have. I meet them frequently, one-to-one conversations with many colleagues.
You've talked to them, but you haven't actually done anything about it. I mean, you haven't put
how do you know what I've done or not done about it?
Well, I'm asking you. I mean, if you can tell me that you have done something specific to meet their concerns, to either change your operation or say, I'm going to time limit my leadership, or if it's not working by a certain time, I'm going to stand aside. I mean, those kind of things.
Why should I time limit a leadership when I've been elected by a very large number of members and supporters in order to lead this party? If, at the end of the day, an election somewhere results in a different leader, so be it. But I would be irresponsible if I walked away from a mandate that I was given and a responsibility I was given. I ask colleagues to respect that as well.
You have been under enormous personal pressure. You must have talked about this with your family, and there was talk that there was a period when you did have a bit of a wobble. You thought, is it really worth it? Can I carry on personally doing
Andrew,
this?
You read too many newspapers. You really do.
It's all I do.
It's all you do, read newspapers. Well, can I tell you something? There's no wobbles.
Asking, is it true?
No, absolutely untrue. There's no wobbles, there's no stress, there's no depression. I'll tell you what real stress is. Real stress is when you can't feed your kids. Real stress is if you don't know you've got a job next day. Real stress is if your landlord is going to evict you from your home. That's what real stress in our society is. Our job as politicians, as public representatives, is to recognise the real stresses people face in society and try and bring about a society that deals with those issues.
And you can only deal with that if you win power as a party.
Yes.
And if 80% of your own MPs think that they can't do that under you, isn't part of the fault Jeremy Corbyn's fault? He can't all be your enemies, all them and nothing to do with me. Surely some of it is to do with you.
I'm quite prepared to believe that everything goes wrong is my fault, everything that's successful is somebody else's achievement. That's fine, that's what leadership's about. But I just say this, we've defeated the government on 22 occasions. We've won parliamentary by-elections with swings to Labour. We've increased our vote in local elections. We've won 4 mayoral contests. There's 3 million families who are £1,000 a year better off because of the Labour opposition to the cuts in working tax credits. Every person in receipt of personal independence payments continues to get them because of Labour opposition. The forced academisation of schools is not happening because of Labour opposition. There's quite a lot that we've achieved in the past 9 months we can be very proud of.
Your MPs clearly don't completely agree with that. But can I ask you about
well,
another criticism?
Voted with me on those issues.
Another thing they say about they did, but it's the leadership question. And people say to me, how can it be that Tony Blair, much reviled today, but nonetheless he won a huge landslide victory in the Labour leadership election to begin with. Then he won another landslide victory in the country. He had all those votes behind him, and you voted against him 500 times. How can you then turn round to the Labour Party and say, give me the loyalty that I never gave to Tony Blair?
I never attacked Tony Blair personally, and I
No,
don't
but you
do
voted
that.
against him.
And I voted on issues of the Iraq War, on issues of the conduct of anti-terrorism, and issues such as student fees and student loans, a number of issues. Yes, of course I did, over quite a long period. I also very happily and very proudly voted to bring in the National Minimum Wage, to bring in the Human Rights Act, to bring in, under Gordon Brown, the Equalities Act. And so, yes, and
again,
also...
Sorry, Neil Kinnock had a big mandate too, and you were part of the campaign to topple him. How can you turn around and talk to people and say, I want your loyalty, the loyalty that I did not give to Kinnock or Blair?
There was a challenge that Tony Blair made to Neil Kinnock in 1988. It was unsuccessful. We then carried on working in the party to try and win the 1992 election, which sadly was not to be.
Is the victory of the left inside the Labour Party more important than winning the next general election?
What's most important is to change the way politics is done in this country, to excite young people and older people into the idea that you can have a society that doesn't divide people, that doesn't have grotesque levels of inequality, and we don't make the younger generation worse off than this generation and their children worse off than us. It's a way of doing politics that has changed, partly engendered by social media, partly by social movements across Europe and North America. The times are changing, and the last people to understand that seem to be many of our media leader writers. If I may be so bold.
You mentioned social media, and this has all been very genial, but the volumes of abuse being hurled at your opponents on the social media by people who say that they're your supporters is now pretty vile and pretty horrible. I mean, I can read them out, but they're probably unpleasant.
Nobody does vile abuse in my name, with my approval, my support. I absolutely, totally condemn it in every way, as just as much as any abuse that's hurled at me or anybody else is simply wrong. I urge people to engage in political debate, not media abuse of any sort.
So Rob J. Marshall, who says he's one of your supporters and describes Angela Eagle as you treacherous bitch, Julie Doran, who's even worse, talks about Angela Eagle, her Tory-supporting weasels like Angela Eagle or her gang of selfish Blairites.
Totally unacceptable language.
I've talked to lots of MPs who are opposed to you, who are now very worried that they are being forcibly deselected, that Momentum are moving into their constituencies, taking over branches and then taking over CLPs and getting them out. The mood is very, very nasty out there.
I've made it very clear that debate should be respectful, debate should be polite, debate should be political. And I have to say that much of the criticism that's levelled at me by members of Parliament, some of it very unpleasant and some of it very public, is almost never political. Never political. They don't say which particular policy I'm supporting.
It's all become very personal. I absolutely agree with that.
Which is surely a bit unfortunate, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, it is also the case that Momentum has made you its cause. If you go onto the Momentum website, it doesn't say we believe in this, that and the other. It doesn't give you a list of left or leftish policies. It says we are here to support Jeremy Corbyn, and it's your name and your face all over it. So in a sense, you have personalised this.
Well, Momentum has been developed as a way of bringing people into politics, getting people motivated.
Backing Jeremy Corbyn, really.
Many of them are supportive of what my leadership is trying to achieve in economic policy, in human rights policy, in foreign policy, all these areas. I hope we can come together and recognise that the solutions to people's problems out there are actually political.
It seems unlikely. Is there any part of you that would prefer to split the Labour Party than stand down?
Listen, I joined the Labour Party when I was 16. I've been in the Labour Party all my life. My family...
See, Owen Smith says that you told him that you would prefer to split the Labour Party than stand aside.
I've no idea why Owen should say such a thing. I had a quite interesting, almost philosophical political discussion with Owen a week ago. And I'm
But you didn't say that?
Absolutely not. I'm slightly surprised he would go out and say that. But I'm happy to have a discussion with Owen any time, so we can discuss how we take things forward. We work together on the steel industry and other issues, and happy to do so again.
Two other very, very big issues just coming up at the moment. Not about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, though in a sense they are. The Trident vote is coming up. How will you whip your MPs?
Well, I understand the vote is going to be solely on whether or not Britain has continuous at-sea deterrence, and I'm very surprised the government has put down a motion in that sense. If we as a Parliament and the country vote to maintain permanent continuous at-sea deterrence, that actually takes away any opportunity for fulfilling our obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, to reduce the number of vessels or warheads, and it actually takes away...
will you tell Labour MPs to vote that down?
We're going to have a discussion about it. I recognise there are big differences of opinion on this. My views are very well known on this. The views of many others are very well known on this, and so there may well be MPs voting in different lobbies, but the point I'll be making is that by a vote solely on this...
You're not going to insist on a whip?
It actually reduces the opportunity for having future disarmament talks. Surely we all want to live in a nuclear-free world. It was a Labour government, by the way, that signed up to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
We're beyond by the ways because we've got less than half a minute left. You heard David Davis talking about the Chilcot process, and that there's going to be a motion of contempt in the House of Commons against Tony Blair for deceiving the House of Commons. How will you vote in that, and what would you urge Labour MPs to do?
I urge colleagues to read the Butler report and read the Chilcot report about the way in which Parliament was denied the information it should have had, the way in which there was lack of preparations for the post-invasion situation in Iraq, and the way there were the assertions of weapons of mass destruction. Parliament must hold to account, including Tony Blair, those who took us into this particular war. That is surely what a parliamentary democracy is about. I started with a yes or no. Let me try and finish with a yes or no. So vote for the contempt motion, yes or no? I haven't seen it yet, but I think I probably would.
All right. Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. That is nearly all that we've got time for. Thanks to all my guests. On the Sunday Politics in an hour, Andrew Neil will be talking to the Labour leadership challenger, Angela Eagle. I will be back next week with a Conservative leadership contender. They're all over the place. Theresa May in the hot seat. For now, as promised, we leave you with music by the cult US band Miracle Legion, revered by their contemporaries, groups like Radiohead and R.E.M. Indeed, Tom York of Radiohead said the band had changed the way I thought about songs and singings. Miracle Legion came into the studio recently with their beards ahead of their UK tour. Portrait of a Damaged Family is the album, and from it, this is Homer. Goodbye.
One shot, close out the park. I've been waiting a year for this. Jumping high, a few pounds light. My daddy reached out and he gave me a kiss. Georgia waiting in the wings. I seen him running with a dog or two. With a gleam in his eye, sure kid, I'll sign it for you. With just a little more, she'd have been a homer. With just a little more, she'd have been a homer. With just a little more, she'd have been a homer with just a little more. And she'd have been, Well, my daddy met Johnny U. He said, hey man, you're too good for Baltimore. And one of the greats, yeah, that's the one who waits. So meet me later at the locker room door. Meet me later at the locker room door. With just a little more, she'd have been a homer. With just a little more, she'd have been a homer. With just a little more, she'd have been a homer. With just a little more. greats. That's the one who waits. So meet me later at the lagoon.